And welcome to our presentation on document design and layout basics. For this unit, you're going to be working with a group, and so group and team activity will be important. And you're also going to be finding out how to design a document so that it looks well and so that people can get your information more quickly. Even though it might seem as if in certain professions you're not going to need to know how to lay out a document because you're not going to be a graphic designer, the reality is that we encounter document design every day, and that almost every workplace you may be asked to write a document that has to look a certain way. And while that might be something that just includes text, oftentimes it includes visuals as well. And you'll find that when we move from this unit into our next unit, when we're going to be working on writing instructions, that everything you've learned about how to make a document look right and convey information well in visuals as well as text is going to be important and will carry over to that assignment. So, what makes a document work? Let's think about the basic principles of document design and how we can apply them to any document that we're working on to make it more readable and easier to grasp for your audience. First, visual information helps us remember text and information better, but it shouldn't just be there for decoration. It has to do more than just the text by itself would. Also, we remember images of humans better than images of objects. For many years, the campaign ads for selling milk just had milk cartons that were featured, and then they added the Got Milk campaign, in which many people who are either famous or attractive had the milk mustache, and because there were humans in it, it was more easy to sell, and people responded to it more effectively. Now, obviously, this particular model is attractive, and people say that sex sells, meaning that sexy images of people will sell whatever product you're interested in selling. But there's a time and a place for that. I don't know that it's necessarily appropriate for selling milk, although, it makes some sense here. But on the other hand, you have to think about whether or not that's an image you want to use and how effective it would be. You can still use humans without using people who are trying to be provocative. And so one of the things you would consider is what is the product that you might be trying to display or advertise, and whether or not using that tool would be effective. Another thing is that we tend to remember things that are funny better than things that aren't. And again, there are times and places for using things that are funny. A product like Twizzlers, which are hard to figure out how you would sell because Twizzlers just look like a candy, they've used this ad that's here on our left with some humor to it to try and make the product both visually entertaining and engrossing for the audience. Also, if you notice, they've used a color scheme of black and white for the photo behind and the Twizzlers that are red in front of it and in a funny pattern. That kind of visual distinction is going to help draw our eye. Red is something that draws the eye very clearly and very quickly. And they've put the biggest group of red, the Twizzlers themselves, right at the top. And because it's so bright, it's going to draw our attention to the product first. And then we'll look at the human behind it and see the funny parts of it. And then at the bottom, it says Twizzlers Pull and Peel. That's the last thing that the eye will see. We have Marky Mark and his Calvin Kleins on the right. And again, this goes back to times and places for using human images to display information. The human eye is very easily overloaded and distracted, and our eyes wear out looking at too much contrast. Obviously, it's high contrast when you have black on white, but the highest level of visual contrast that it is extremely hard on our eyes to look at is red text on a blue background. You can see that this is the exact same text on the left and the right, but probably you're already wincing having to try and read the blue and red text together. Again, another issue is making a document that has text read properly. So proofreading matters as much as it would for anything else. Like all other documents, you're thinking about your audience. And so, for example, with the advertisement that's on the farthest right here, you can see that it's a income tax, general insurance, auto, home, and business, and life insurance, but business is spelled incorrectly. It's hard to get enthusiastic about somebody selling you insurance or doing your income taxes if they can't spell the word business properly. The advertisement in the middle has craving for a snack. We have breakfast, sandwiches, lunch, sandwiches. Sandwiches obviously doesn't need to be on there twice. The images are kind of bland and weird at the bottom. There's a lot of red, which will, attract the eye, but it's simply like the place that it's advertising is Amico, which is tiny, and that little logo up at the top. So visually, it's not very attractive. And on top of that, it doesn't have very good proofreading, which is going to look poor to your reader. Then the one on the far left says I'm ordered instead of imported sweet clementines. Again, it just makes it look as if the person who is trying to convey that information was not paying any attention or taking it seriously. So let's talk about some more basic principles of design. To understand the principles and apply them, you have to know a little bit about color and contrast. Here I've presented the grayscale contrast and the color wheel. As you can see, that the highest contrasts are the colors that are most opposite one another on the color wheel. So for example, yellow and violet, which are in the center, red orange off to our left, and blue green off to the right, and so on. Blue and orange, red and green. And when you put these two colors together, just as we saw with the red on blue before, the stark contrast can be engaging or it can be overwhelming because our eyes do wear out. Again, with the grayscale, there are times when you want the starkest contrast, black and white, which will make which is effective for writing text, as you can see from the top of this slide. It makes it stand out and it's easy to read. But there are other times where the shading will make more difference in how you approach the image. As we just said, the strongest contrasts are the ones that are opposite on the color wheel. And so you have to think about, if you use colors from one side of the color wheel, then you can add a splash of something from the other side, and that will give it a sort of a pop or a kick, and that will move your eye to that place of contrast. So you want to be thinking for the audience, where do I want to put the audience's eye? Wherever that contrast is going to be, that's where they're going to be focused more quickly and readily. In general, it's best to avoid super harsh contrasts and use warm colors with warm colors, which are the reds, oranges, and yellows, and then cool colors with cool colors, which are the blue, green, purple spectrum. But again, you want a little bit of contrast in order to make things more interesting. In the document we have in front of us, it's a picture of a beach, and of course it's got a very flat, even horizon, but they've put a peach color, which is slight contrast to all the blues and greens in the middle, at the edges, which helps pull our eye out to both sides and make that vista look even wider. It makes that landscape look bigger because the contrast is moving us in both directions. It's also got some visual appeal because it's got this tree on the left, which is a piece of contrast as well. The green on blue is a little less contrast than the peach, but even the peach isn't bright red. I think if we change this peach color out to a super bright red, the document would be kind of ruined. Now, we have the colors that we see affect us, and they tend to make us feel a certain way. We tend to feel soothed and calmed by cool colors, which we said were the blues, purples, and greens, and excited and interested and invigorated by the warm colors, the red, orange, and yellow spectrum. So you want to think about, if you're trying to convey information that you want to be soothing, for example, then what colors would be appropriate for that? And let's say you were, so for example, if you were doing maybe a layout and design in which you were putting an advertisement together for a therapy clinic, well, blues and greens would make sense because therapists are trying to reassure people and make them feel calm. And so that would be a good choice. On the other hand, if it's you were doing a flyer for student government and they were having some kind of party, you might want to use the warmer side of the color scale because that's something that would be exciting and invigorating. So you need to be thinking, again, who's the audience and what kind of information are you trying to convey? And then what colors go with that? We also have particular associations with certain colors, but it's important to recognize that these are cultural. So for example, red can seem very aggressive or strong or heavy, but it can also seem very sensual. And in other cultures, in Asia, for example, is considered to be very lucky. So that, think about the cultural reasons why a color might affect people. And so if you're thinking about audience, you have to think about that color in context. Blues tend to be comforting, as we said before, because they're on the cool side of the color spectrum. Yellows can also indicate, yellows and oranges, caution. We use it for cautions and warnings, but it can be spring, brightness, liveliness. Green is associated with food, nature, health, and money. Brown, again, for nature. So if you think about something that's trying to feel natural and calming, something with a green and brown will work well. And we see that in a lot of advertisements, especially for organic groceries. Places like Starbucks are using that green and brown pattern. And green and brown are not so far away, but they are contrasting on the color scale because the brown is a little closer to the oranges and the green is a little closer to the blues. The orange, again, warmth and excitement. Pink can seem childlike and feminine, which doesn't mean that other people can't wear pink or shouldn't wear pink, but that's one of the associations we currently have in our culture. Purple, often considered to be a color associated with sophistication or royalty. Black is considered classy, serious, dramatic. Gray, more businesslike, can also be seen to be sort of cold, but also distinctive. And white, pure, simple, and clean. As I put at the bottom, you seldom see them offering a Ford pickup truck, which is, a truck that's trying to be sort of masculine and tough in a pink color. And that's because of the associations we have with the color. Whether those are good associations or realistic associations, those are our current associations, so it's worth knowing what they are and just thinking about them in terms of how you want to use them. If you ever wondered why hospital rooms are really depressing, it's because they're made for function and not for the human eye. As you can see here, we've got a sort of mint and pink, which are highly contrasting curtains that we have. There's a stark white light, stark white sheets, the walls, and then we've got all of these different, contrasting kinds of wood. They're all fake wood. And so this is a space that might not be very conducive to healing, in part because visually it's jarring. It doesn't have calming colors. The accent colors are glaring. And, that's part of why it can be really uncomfortable and depressing to be in such a room, even if it's something you need for your health. In addition to choosing colors very carefully, we also have to think about choosing shapes carefully. Shapes affect us. We're attracted to symmetry, but when things are too symmetrical, they can seem what we call static or even, so balanced that they lose your interest. On the other hand, we tend to think of human faces as being more attractive the more symmetrical they are. So when you're thinking about whether or not you want people to be attracted or drawn to something, think about how much symmetry you want to use. When things are asymmetrical, there's a contrast, and our eye tends to be attracted to contrast, but too much contrast can be overwhelming and unappealing. On the top half, we've got Leo, we've got Denzel. You can see that their faces are extremely symmetrical, and they're considered classically attractive. On the bottom level, we've got equally impressive actors, but they're considered to be, their faces are not as symmetrical. So they might be more engaging as what we call character actors because they're not considered to be classically attractive. It's not that they're not attractive to some people, but it's still worth knowing that the facial expressions and the shape and symmetry of a face makes a difference to the viewer. If you just look quickly at this slide, probably your eye was drawn first to the most asymmetrical shapes, the bear and Texas. Now, you may not be able to remember what was your first thing that you saw, but because those are the least symmetrical shapes here, when we look at a group of shapes like this, our eye tends to go there. Symmetrical shapes we find very reassuring in the same way that blues and greens tend to be calming, and asymmetrical shapes draw our eye more and can be more invigorating and exciting in the way that the warmer colors on the color wheel can. So again, if you're thinking back to a product that you want, like the advertisement for a therapy clinic, you're going to want to probably use calming shapes, symmetrical shapes, rounded shapes, not spiky ones. On the other hand, if you're going for a party or something, a disco ball with spiky shapes and colors coming out of it, that's going to probably be enticing. So as we just said, rounded shapes, calming, spiky shapes, exciting. So when you're analyzing or designing a document, you have to ask yourself, what's the information I'm trying to convey? And as usual, who's the audience? Can I use visuals to help me convey it? Obviously, visuals aren't appropriate for every document. We don't use them in resumes, but we do use them for instructions. Can I use visuals of people? We remember people better, so if you can use them, that's appropriate. Do I want to use humor or sex appeal? Would it be appropriate? Obviously, if you're designing something for a funeral, you're not going to be using humor or sex appeal. What colors are best for the project? And we just talked about that. And what shapes would be best for the project based on how we know shapes work in terms of symmetry and